Number 1. The United States Constitution. The Constitution has had a very large historical significance on the U.S. because in the late 1700s, our founding fathers had the vision to create a guiding body of governing principles that are still applicable today. By giving the federal government broad powers, establishing a system of checks and balances, and by adding a process for the creation of amendments, the Constitution set the standard for modern lawmaking systems as well as social reform systems.
May 1787, Philadelphia. It's now or never for the anything but United States of America. If they don't come up with a constitution to establish a functioning central government, the new nation will most certainly implode. The states send 55 delegates to a constitutional convention to repair the woefully inadequate Articles of Confederation.
Number 2. The Bill of Rights. The Bill of Rights were passed to guarantee people their basic human rights. This consisted of the first 10 amendments. The list of amendments helped limit governmental power and to protect citizens from unlawful actions towards human rights. The Bill of Rights were written in response to states calling for greater constitutional protection for individual rights.
Well, the Constitution took days and nights, but the writers still had to go look at it twice, cause the states that reviewed it said, here's some advice, it should guarantee freedom, yeah, that would be nice. So the founders said, alright, and wrote the Bill of Rights. Yep, the first 10 amendments are the Bill of Rights. Well, the Constitution took days and nights, but the writers still had to go look at it twice, cause the people reviewed it said, here's some advice, it should guarantee freedom, yeah, that would be nice. So the founders said, alright, and wrote the Bill of Rights. Yep, the first 10 amendments are the Bill of Rights.
The Declaration of Independence. This declaration is historically significant because it was the document announcing that the colonies wanted to separate from British control. By writing this declaration, the colonies demanded independence and to be free, leading to the Revolutionary War. The writing of the Declaration of Independence was in reaction to all of the unlawful taxes that the colonies received from Great Britain.
When, in the course of human events, it becomes necessary for one people to dissolve the political bands which have connected them with another, and to assume among the powers of the earth the separate and equal station to which the laws of nature and of nature's God entitle them.
A decent respect to the opinions of mankind requires that they should declare the causes which impel them to the separation.
We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness.
Number 4. The Louisiana Purchase Treaty. The Louisiana Purchase Treaty doubled the size of the continental U.S. at an extreme bargain, just $15 million. The French only gave the U.S. such a bargain because they needed to fund war efforts in Europe. The land acquired later became 15 states, and the treaty became the seed of the U.S. idea of manifest destiny. It gave natural resources and trade opportunities to expand the economy, as well as finally establishing the idea that the government has implied powers that are not listed in the Constitution.
So the U.S. wanted New Orleans, and newly elected President Thomas Jefferson sends two guys to negotiate with the French about purchasing the city. Jefferson's original instructions to the two men were to attempt to negotiate $10 million to buy either New Orleans, part of the Florida Territory, or at the very least secure access to the Mississippi River port. Now look at this from the French's perspective. Their plans to establish an empire in the Americas was failing. They feared a war with Britain was imminent and that their territory would likely be taken by Canada. So they offered the U.S. a deal too good to refuse. They offered not only New Orleans, but the entire Louisiana Territory, and only bumping up the price from $10 million to $15 million.
Number 5. The Emancipation Proclamation by Abraham Lincoln. The Emancipation Proclamation caught the attention of many and changed the way people thought about the war. Although the proclamation did not end slavery in the nation, it announced the acceptance of black men into the Union Army and Navy, enabling the liberated to become liberators. The proclamation was issued by Abraham Lincoln, and the main goal of the document was to cripple the Confederacy.
Because you know I'm gonna emancipate, well, kind of. I'm gonna emancipate, well, kind of. I'm gonna emancipate, well, kind of. I'm gonna emancipate. Yeah, I know I said to Mr. Horace G, if I could save the Union, I'd keep slavery, or I would end it all, or just end some. But now it is time for emancipation.
Number 6. Common Sense by Thomas Paine. The pamphlet Common Sense, written by Thomas Paine, impacted the United States' future tremendously. Before the pamphlet was written, many colonists did not choose to have an opinion on the subject of breaking away from British rule. Most colonists disliked the British in one way or another, but might not have felt the need to break away from them completely. After word of the pamphlet spread around the colonies, many colonists began to feel that breaking away from British rule was in their best interests and that it was time to make a change.
Take a look at Common Sense, written by Thomas Paine. It was published in early 1776, and it's one of those key American documents that would inspire the colonies to fight for their independence. Now, before we dive into the author or even the document itself, let's take a look at some of the background that led to its publishing. And the first thing to keep in mind is that the colonies had been in revolt against England for about 9-10 months at this point. And the First Continental Congress had met in the summer of 1775, and that's where they had appointed George Washington as the general of the Continental Army. And the key thing to keep in mind is that there's still this really big debate in the colonies, and it is over, do we go for full independence against England, or do we go for improved representation within their political system at the time?
Number 7. The Articles of Confederation. The Articles of Confederation are not historically significant for what they did right, but rather what they did wrong. By learning from the failures of the Articles, our founding fathers were able to create the infinitely better Constitution we know today.
I'd like to thank the 5 states that actually sent delegates to this convention here in Annapolis, and if there's nothing else, I guess we can call it a day. Oh, Alexander Hamilton, what'd you want to say? The Articles of Confederation are flawed with no new amendments because we need a unanimous charge, which I tell you is impossibly hard. The Articles of Confederation are flawed. We can tax states disregard. No strings to enforce the laws. This government is a big faux pas.
Number 8. Uncle Tom's Cabin by Harriet Beecher Stowe. Uncle Tom's Cabin is historically significant for informing citizens of the horrors of slavery in the northern states. This caused a rise in the abolition movement, which led to an even more divided country and eventually the Civil War. In addition, the novel's success in Britain convinced the British that they should aid the Confederacy in the Civil War.
When Uncle Tom's Cabin was published in 1852, the anti-slavery novel flew off the shelves. 17 printing presses ran 24 hours a day to keep up with the demand, making it the best-selling novel of the 19th century.
The book struck at our emotions as a nation, and it made us see ourselves. It was our emotional mirror, and it prompted some individuals to rethink how they thought of slavery.
Number 9. The Monroe Doctrine. The Monroe Doctrine gained historical significance when it was viewed with a much broader interpretation and after the Roosevelt Corollary was added to the document. With a broader interpretation and the Roosevelt Corollary, the Monroe Doctrine became a tool used for international police powers, American expansionism, and imperialism, and it ultimately aided the United States in its rise to becoming an international superpower. By giving the U.S. the ability to enter the Mexican-American War, the Monroe Doctrine can be considered the root of Manifest Destiny.
Monroe, that's me. I've been president of the U.S. since 1817, and for too long, Europe thinks that the new world, it was put there for making new colonies. To Spain, do you hear?
South America, Bolivia freed all your colonies. It's a shame, I agree. But you best accept it and move on. Those lands are staying free. The quadruple alliance.
Number 10. The Gettysburg Address by Abraham Lincoln. The Gettysburg Address was historically significant because it helped with the process of beginning to heal our very broken country. The speech helped the Americans change their view towards themselves and towards the government. Before the speech, few people had talked about the idea of equality, but after, this idea was much more popular and much more widespread.
77 years ago, our fathers brought forth on this continent a new nation, conceived in liberty and dedicated to the proposition that all men are created equal. Now we are engaged in a great civil war, testing whether that nation, or any nation so conceived and so dedicated, can long endure. We are met on a great battlefield of that war. We have come to dedicate a portion of that field as a final resting place for those who here gave their lives that that nation might live.